One great thing about being a writer is seeing impossible moments. Welcome to the Whispering Inkwell. Now, what I mean by impossible moments doesn't necessarily a moment that's actually impossible, but it's really more about seeing little tiny instances that other people just miss. It's like walking around in your life and just kind of seeing what's going on around you and seeing all of these little random things that they're just the tiniest things. They're the tiniest little details. And yet, those moments, those little impossible moments, can become a story all by themselves, or they can be that first domino that falls in a story. And they're everywhere. Like, they are literally everywhere. Uh, a month or two ago, my daughter was at a grocery store and she happens to like look over and she sees a Jeep, right? Totally ordinary. And it was camouflage, which is not necessarily unusual, I suppose, depending on where you live. But what really just completed the picture was in the skeleton sitting there in the passenger seat was a full-sized glow in the dark green skeleton. And she comes home and she says to me, I have a Frank story. And she tells me. And next thing I know, I have written a complete letter talking about Frank and how he would respond to the skeleton in the vehicle and what he would think about it and what, all the speculative information, like whose vehicle is this, why would they just leave the skeleton alone in the vehicle, and just, all these different things. And he just trails off because that's what Frank does. Frank is an invisible friend, in case you don't know. He's part of my Invisible Friends Chronicle, but then there are just like other moments along the way and something just perfectly ordinary. I was at church the other day and there was this little girl at my church and she was talking to someone and they asked her how old she was. And she's like, I'm 6. And, before I was 6, I was a baby. And after I was, no longer a baby, I was 1. And then I was 2. And then I turned 3. And she keeps going all the way up until she gets to age 6, to which the person responds to her, well, what were you before you were 1? And she gives them a look. And she darts behind this person that was standing behind her. And she peeks around the corner of this person's legs and she gives him quite the look. And she says, you make me mad. And then she growled at him. And it was just so cute. And it was so random. And I stood there watching and I thought, yes, this is absolutely something that is worth writing about. Not because it is necessarily unique or unusual. Kids are always doing little things. Little kids are great because the stuff that they say and the stuff that they come up with is just so eloquent in its simplicity. And I find them to be an endless source of inspiration. But they're not big moments. You know what I mean? Like, these are just itty bitty, teeny tiny moments that could otherwise completely pass unnoticed in your life. For lack of a better term, they're just impossible. Like, you can't predict them. You can't, like, just watch a kid and have this grand expectation that during that period of time that you're observing them, that they are going to do something amazing. And I mean, the same can apply to probably most adults, although I feel like there's probably a few out there that you're like, it's fine. I'll wait 5 minutes. They'll do something. But those are a little more rare, probably, I hope. And even so, if you can predict that they're going to do something like that, do you really want to be standing that close to them? Personally, maybe not. But there's just so many little things, you just gotta step back and just see the little things. I was looking out my bedroom window a few nights ago, and I was just watching the wind just kind of blow the branches on the trees, and I could just see nightfall was kind of, the light was dimming, and there was just these fireflies. And there's just something magical about fireflies, right? It's the funniest thing because you see them during the day and you're just like, ew, it's a bug. But you see them at night and it's a completely transforming experience. And I was looking at these fireflies out in my yard and I thought to myself, I don't have an invisible friend that can write about those. Like, I went through the list of them in my mind. And it's like, Frank is great. And Frank can write about all kinds of things. But I'm like, he's just not the right character to write about fireflies. And I just went through all of them. And I'm like, it doesn't feel right. It just doesn't feel right for any of them. So, of course, I had to create a new character so that I could have one that would write about fireflies. But there are things around us everywhere, in those moments where you're just struggling to find something to write about, just look around. If necessary, my advice is create an invisible friend. And then ask yourself, how would they see this? Because I have found for myself, that opens up an entire plethora of options from which to choose from. I love getting into the minds of my characters and just wondering to myself, how are they going to take in this information? And different people and different characters, they take in information in a completely different way. You can talk to one person and be like, yeah, I had this medical procedure done, and they're just like, la, 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 la. I don't want to hear whatever disgusting thing you had done. But then you talk to another person and they're like, really? And then what? Because they just enjoy science or anatomy or I don't know, gross things maybe. Hard to say. And it's just that way in so many things in life. Like, what excites one person doesn't excite another person. So sometimes we just need to find that different perspective and just look around. Inspiration is around us everywhere, in every day in ordinary life. We just have to be open to receive that inspiration. And if you look around and you still can't find anything, maybe this is not good advice, but I'll read a book or watch a movie or a TV show or something. There's inspiration. It's out there. It's available. And if you don't know how to write something from one perspective, just write it from someone else's. Just find one of those little tiny moments and just ask yourself, oh, tongue is not working today apparently. Ask yourself, what does this look like from someone else's perspective? And it's just interesting. It's interesting, the things that will pop up and make the ordinary, completely extraordinary. Actually, I have a really good example of this. So, one of the Invisible Friends letters that I wrote recently was from Harmony. And Harmony, well, if you can kind of like take, and if you've ever seen any Doctor Who episodes and you're familiar with who River's song is, just kind of like imagine that personality and then take the personality of like Indiana Jones, but in female version, and mash those two together, and you would kind of be in the direction of Harmony. Not completely, but that would probably give you an overall idea. So, Harmony looks at my brand new washing machine, which is black, and she doesn't just see a washing machine. In fact, I'm pretty sure she didn't actually notice the washing machine. What she saw was the fact that it said that it was Volcano Black, which made her think of volcanoes, which reminded her of how she intends on going on an adventure with the entertainer. And that made her think about all the adventures that they had come up with so far and how this was some sort of divine sign that they absolutely needed to go bungee jumping over an active volcano. All that out of a color. How much more can you come up with from all the things that you encounter in your day? Until next time, take care.